I believe that Gen Z is an increasingly globalized generation where through social media, through Instagram and TikTok, they want to make an impact for Christ, but aren't sure how. What does that look like? What is that step? Young people like to listen to people like them. They are more likely to listen to their peers than a lot of other voices in their lives, which normally is a really bad thing, but we've seen that be a remarkably good thing.
Welcome to the Lausanne Movement podcast, where we have a passion to accelerate global mission together. If you like today's episode, won't you take a moment to rate and review our podcast and subscribe? That way you won't miss a thing. And now, for today's interview. Well, Jordan, welcome to the podcast. It's great to have you with us.
Hey, Jason, it's so good to be here on the podcast with you today.
Yeah, I'm excited to have you on to discuss all things Gen Z. I'm keen to hear about your ministry with HowToLife and reaching out to the next generation, and hopefully unpack some of the insights and reframing thoughts that you might have surrounding how we can better reach and disciple the next generation. But let's start at the beginning. I would like to hear a bit of your backstory. Could you share a bit about your faith journey, what led you to start the HowToLife movement, and was it a moment or an experience that just sparked this idea, I need to reach my generation for Christ?
Yeah, Jason. For me and growing up, I really grew up with a passion for the Lord. I became a believer at a really young age, growing up in a ministry family. Myself, my parents, and my grandparents really invested into me growing up, and through that, I really wanted to do more to help reach my friends in my community for the Lord. I grew up in the U.S. Originally born in the state of New Jersey, but grew up in the state of Arkansas, right in the middle of the USA. And growing up in Arkansas, I realized there were a lot of people from my school who it is a more particularly quote unquote culturally Christian state in the US. But with that being said, I realized that a lot of the kids I went to school with didn't really know what it meant to follow Jesus passionately and boldly, which for me led me to want to do something to help challenge people there who maybe weren't believers at all, or maybe they claimed to be a Christian but didn't really know what it means to follow the Lord on a deep level. And that's what led me as a 16-year-old to say, all right, I've got a year and a half left of high school. I will be graduating and moving off into life. And I realized that I had a short window to be able to try to do something more, to be able to help share Jesus with my friends. And I got together with some others of my Christian peers and friends, and we said, what if we could arrange and organize an event that was led all by youth to help reach youth in our community for Christ? The concept of something student led is not completely foreign. It is something that I have seen in action. It often is attempted at times, but we said, what if we could do that and really scale it and do something with excellence that was led by youth for youth, an evangelism event with the purpose of inviting people that were not believers to be able to come and hear the gospel and respond to the gospel that night. And that was what happened. We had a leadership team that planned and kind of grew together in community and with purpose, and started with just four of us, turned into 12 at our next meeting, then 35 people at our next meeting, and then 60 people at the next meeting. And then eventually had at our event in March of 2015, over 750 young people attended this How to Life movement event, where everybody who was at this event on the stage was 18 years old and younger, which was a pretty rare concept to have something where it's like, this is done by teens to reach teens. And that really was part of the draw. That's part of why people wanted to come. They're like, that's cool. That's exciting. This is an event by the youth for the youth, a student led youth rally. And ended up having a really powerful response. That event consisted of music and testimonies and stories of the difference that Jesus has made in people's lives, and then finished with presentation of the gospel. I was able to be the evangelist at that event as a 16-year-old to kind of do the Billy Graham gospel message type of part of the program. And there were about 75 young people who did come forward during that time to that invitation, which I remember that moment deeply and just know how much that really ministered to so many people there. And there were kids who came to know the Lord for the first time, many who rededicated their life to the Lord and really called it a bit of a new beginning in their walk with Christ. And then there were some who maybe didn't respond in that altar call moment, but it did really change their life still nonetheless. There were people that I had grown up with from elementary school who were good friends of mine who it was a high mark in their faith journey for them. And to this day, they're still living for the Lord passionately, boldly. And they would say that the Lord did something in their heart through that whole campaign and being a part of our teams. And so that was kind of the original story. And we didn't set out with the idea of, hey, let's start a global youth movement. We said, let's do something for Arkansas. Let's do something for our town, our local Jerusalem, rather than the ends of the earth. I wanted to do something for my own friends. And I'm glad that that's the way that this whole movement started with such a wholesome small town origin story like this, but with the purpose now of then helping many other young people. And I had no idea at that time that just sharing that story with more and more people would lead to something that now has been spreading to not just other towns, not just other states, not just other countries, but other continents. And that's been an amazing journey. And that's kind of what the last 9 years now have been all about.
You know what I find so inspirational and curious about your story is that it began with you as a 16-year-old. I've spent many years working with youth, trying to mobilize them, trying to inspire them, trying to disciple them in their walk with Christ. And it's very rare, like you've mentioned, that a 16-year-old will be willing to step up and lead a movement, to lead any kind of ministry within their local school or with their friends. I'd be curious to hear. You mentioned that you come from a multi generational ministry family. Do you believe that there's an intersection between your ministry origin story and the origin of your family? How much of your story and your success in a ministry sense, do you believe is attributed to the example set by your family?
I attribute a high amount of, if we're going to call it ministry success, or let's say just impact and influence.
Better word?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Every person, some people grow up in a family that are believers. Some grow up in a family that are passionate, on fire ministry leader believers. Others grow up in a family who don't have that are not believers and don't have influences in their life who are pouring into them. And for them, their discipleship does not come primarily at first from their family, but has to come from their local church or from friends or mentors or peers or others who the Lord brings into their life. And I know for me, I've worked with people from all sorts of different backgrounds. Some come from passionate believer families, some don't. But I do know for me, having a family that has invested into me and was highly intentional with me growing up, I mean, that's irreplaceable. The impact that can come from that. I believe that when you invest into children and help them encounter the gospel, and not just encounter the gospel, but pull you into ministry opportunities for me growing up. So my grandfather, his name is Ron Hutchcraft. He's been a Christian ministry leader for a long time, and originally with Youth for Christ many years ago, and then has run his own ministry organization, Ron Hutchcraft Ministries, for the last many decades, which for many years has done radio ministry and then also a lot of work with Native Americans and First Nations, indigenous people in North America. So I grew up in a really unique kind of cross-cultural missions environment on my home continent in the US and in Canada, having an opportunity to go and witness some really unique evangelism, which that whole model was one of helping Native American young people share the gospel with Native Americans on reservations, because Native American young people are probably not going to listen to a predominantly white American church culture coming in and trying to push their religion on them. They don't normally take well to that, but they will listen to other Native Americans. And for me, I took that model to heart, both being able to witness a lot of this as a kid, that made a mark on me. And then through that as well, that also inspired me with the How to Life model that is people reaching people like them and has been deeply significant for sure.
Yeah, I find it so interesting that the model that was presented to you from your grandfather's ministry and the ministry that your parents are involved in You were able to contextualize that for your own generation and even for your own event. But I want to just speak a little bit more into the family dynamics that you have, because there's this common cliche, and I would call it a cliche. I don't know if it's always a general truth that ministry kids end up losing their faith and rejecting the church and feeling deeply hurt. And while that is definitely a truth, there is also another side to the story where there are people like yourself and people like your father who have seen ministry modeled and seen faith modeled in such a way that has inspired them to continue, not only in faith, but in ministry as well. So I'd be keen to hear from you. Why do you think it is that some ministry kids tend to fall off the faith track? And what was the difference for you? Why, in this case, did you accept Christ and not only accept him, but pursue him in a meaningful way?
Yeah, I mean, it's a great question, Jason, regarding just the dynamic of when it comes to ministry and young people who grow up in ministry. Why do some people fall off? Why do some people stay on? And it definitely is a question I've wrestled with a lot and I get asked a lot from people. I do believe that first and foremost, that young people do, at the end of the day, they do get a choice. They don't always choose to follow the Lord. Things can happen. There can be cultural influences that come in that take the place of wanting to desire the Lord first and foremost. And that's heartbreaking. And every young person is different. It really depends on the person. But I do believe that for me, some of the things, one of the most substantial things that I have been a believer in. And this is part of why, with our How to Life movement work, we work to empower young people. I believe that if a young person is empowered in their faith, if they are turned loose as a young person to make an impact, to be a part of ministry as a teenager and even as a child. And rather than saying, hey, you stay home and live a little comfortable, sanitized life in the US, that could be a very easy thing to do. Oh, they're just going to stay home. They're going to go to school. And their life is not all too different than the kid down the street from them who is growing up in the little comfortable American dream, little life bubble. But then have family, they're still doing ministry. I often that can lead to resentment, like, oh, my dad's always away, my mom's always away, what are they doing? Whereas I just believe involve young people in ministry, whether it's the ministry with you or through something else on a localized level. I think that's huge to be able to have that as an opportunity, as an option. With our How to Life events that we do, we try to empower teens so that they get a chance to be a part of substantial ministry. Our events we do are not just for seeing people come to Christ at an evangelism event. We believe in proclamation evangelism, yes, although I believe even more so in using proclamation evangelism as a opportunity to empower local believers. And in many senses, it's a discipleship and mobilization effort that we are doing, which helps teenagers get an opportunity, and young 20 somethings now too, to have an opportunity to do ministry before they get older. And that can shape the trajectory of their whole life. We have many leaders we've worked with who said, oh, I was planning to do this with my life or this with my life, but now I'm wanting to be involved in ministry and missions for the rest of my life. And that turning point came after being a part of that How to Life event. So I'm kind of synthesizing a few things here, both whether you're raising kids of your own or just in general with Christian young people. I think I heard somewhere the stat that a lot of people like to share the stat of, like, it's some 60 to 80% of young people, at least in the US or North American church circles, that leave the church after they graduate high school. But the question is for the people who stayed, why did they stay? And one of the reasons some of them have stayed is because they were given opportunities to meaningfully serve within their church context, a ministry context. And I think that's huge because people have to make it a heart thing, their walk with Jesus. And that happens as a young person for almost everybody in their journey. Not everyone, but for many, 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 many people. That's how it happens.
Well, I'd like to move on to the heart of your mission, How to Life. It's a fascinating story. You've shared a little bit about how it began, but you mentioned that it's grown into a movement that is now going global. Could you just share a little bit about how that transition happened from a singular event in your local school to a growing movement across the world?
We had this event when I was 16 in Arkansas in my high school with people from other high schools in my community. And that was the first of what has now turned into a fast growing global youth movement. And originally it was not global, it was Arkansas, the state. And then we added Missouri was our second state in the middle of the US, had events in just a region of the US in Arkansas and in Missouri. And then we added more states, Illinois, Tennessee, and Texas. It became like the central US. And then the next year, it was 13 states in one school year from coast to coast, everywhere from Seattle, Washington area on the West Coast to Georgia on the East Coast and a bunch of places in between. And then the next year was the year 2018 that we first had people from outside the US that made an intentional request of us to say, hey, this is a really cool story. Could you maybe help us do something like this in our countries? And that led us to launch How to Life groups in England and the UK, and then in Germany, and then eventually France and Mexico, all in the kind of 2018, 2019 school year. And then after that year, we're like, this is a movement that is nationwide in the US and then global now on two continents with half a dozen or so countries with young people who are wanting to do something more to reach their friends for Jesus in their places. And 2020, we had a pandemic that put a major pause on a lot of our developments at that time. But then in the years past, been really fascinating to see how to life movement has developed into. We have taken more and more of an approach of seeing events start up in parts of the US that are much less reached parts of the USA, such as New York City in the Northeast, where there's a massive need for ministry, for evangelism, for kingdom impact, and especially among young people. And we've seen some amazing teams emerge in New York City just in the past couple of years, even with us. And Ontario, in particular, and Toronto. Toronto is one of the most global, multi ethnic cities on the entire planet with amount of nationalities represented there. And that's become a really fast growing hub for How to Life in North America. We've got an amazing How to Life Canada base of young people from across Canada over like four different provinces that are working to mobilize with us up there and campaigns in a really pretty secular country overall. And the UK has continued to grow with many different events and campaigns throughout England and hopefully Scotland soon as well. And more interest in Europe, more interest in other countries and continents. Most recently, had events for the first time in Asia, in Singapore, and in Malaysia, both countries that are very different from the more Western country dynamics in a sense, but very pluralistic in their religions and faiths there. And we've had people of, at least in Singapore, that came to that event that were from different faith backgrounds that heard the gospel. These are kids who were Hindu or Buddhist, and they came and they heard the gospel shared, and it moved them. One of our friends said that their friends who came from some of those other world faiths were just in tears at the end of the event, just so moved by these youth led campaigns. And then most recently, added our first two countries in Africa with South Africa, with five events throughout the wonderful country of South Africa between Pretoria, Johannesburg, and the Western Cape, Cape Town area. And then most recently, Nairobi, Kenya. All total, that puts us at over 150 events and campaigns that we've had across 29 US states, two Canadian provinces, and 11 countries across four continents and counting, with more and more young people that are wanting to be involved with this in their areas. And you might be wondering, well, what are these events? What is the purpose of this? And again, any event we do looks a lot like that first event that I described. It's youth reaching youth. These days, it's people between the ages 16 to 22. So it's not just teen to teen, but it is high school age and university age young people. Some are in university, some are not, some are in high school still. It's a mix of all of that coming together on a youth led team to help preach the gospel in their hometowns to their communities. And that's what this looked like in Asia so far. That's what it's looked like in Nairobi, Kenya. That's what it's looked like in Mexico. People will do their event in their home language, whatever that is. They mobilize a local team. This isn't me bringing in a bunch of Americans to do something. No, this is helping a local group of young people from all those countries emerge to organize a campaign in their area. And it's been deeply fruitful because of this fact alone. Young people like to listen to people like them. They will are more likely to listen to their peers than a lot of other voices in their lives, which normally is a really bad thing. But we've seen that be a remarkably good thing when the young people who are believers take their faith to their community in a unique context like this. And I've been so grateful to the Lord for how He has worked through this and brought a vision like this about. I believe that Gen Z is an increasingly globalized generation where through social media, through Instagram and TikTok, people are learning about initiatives like this and other things too that are emerging in this generation that are making a massive impact for the kingdom. Because a lot of young people that do know Jesus, they want to make an impact for Christ, just like I did when I was 16. But aren't sure how. What does that look like? What is that step? And our heart is to help empower those young leaders to the best that we can to step up and do something in their community that could hopefully leave an eternal impact on the lives of their friends, and also an eternal impact on their own lives by helping them get much stronger in their faith through this process. These are future pastors, ministry leaders, next generation people, and they need to know that the older generations and people do believe in them and support them in this sort of thing. And they're not going to be perfect, but the heart behind it and the impact is too substantial to not consider unique concepts like this and in global missions right now.
What I find so fascinating about your story is that I just think of our own context in Pretoria and the narrative that is playing out in our city about how difficult it is to reach Gen Z. And then, like you said, it's a globalized, often a globalized problem. Any city you go to, any church you go to, they're talking about the struggle of reaching the next generation and the initiative. How do we do that? How do we go about this process? But what's fascinating about your story is that it's just kind of multiplied and just spread across the world in a relatively short period of time. And you mentioned the expansion, but I would be interested to hear a bit about how you ended up expanding. Was it an intentional effort from yourself to say, let's reach the city? Did you go find people? How did you spread the message? You and I met a couple of years ago in South Africa with Kyle, who was very keen about starting up How to Life Movement in our country, and he found you on TikTok. So could you share a bit about that story? How's the movement grown? Has it been a relatively natural process, or has it been very intentional? Or is it a mixture of both?
Yeah, it's been a really natural process for the most part through and a little bit of intentionality with it of young people hearing about how to life through social media, through Instagram, through TikTok. And there's a lot of young people on the internet, and we hear a lot of bad stuff about, oh, all this social media stuff, it's ruining the next generation. And it is. I think it's ruining every generation. But the reality is, though, it is a tool. It's a very complex tool, but it is a tool that at the end of the day that we as believers have to figure out how to utilize. And for the first time in the history of humanity, we have the opportunity to meet people around the world. Like, everyday believers have the opportunity to interact with everyday believers on other parts of the globe in a way that was not possible even 50 years ago, much less 100, 200, 2000 years ago. And I believe the Apostle Paul would be thrilled if he'd had the opportunity to have social media and all this. And if he came back today and was like, you have all of these tools at your disposal and you're not using them to their fullest capacity, what's going on? And I think about that sometimes, or even some of the missions leaders from 100, 200 years ago, they'd be like, you have all this stuff. Like, we were so glad when the telegraph got invented so we could like tap and send messages like or we have steamboats so now we don't have to take a 6 month journey, now it's a 1 week journey. Wow. And we're like, yeah, I can just fly anywhere now and really fast, and commission still unfulfilled. Anyways, with young people, today, the opportunity is huge through social media to rally people, to bring people together. That's how most people have been hearing about How to Life movement in particular is through Instagram and a little bit TikTok. We are friends with like TikTokers and people who love the Lord who often will share about when they're at our How to Life events and campaigns. They'll put stuff on their Instagram stories or pages. And through that, that gets us exposure where people hear and like, oh, what is this How to Life thing? And then they stumble across our page, they follow our page, and then we ask them often, hey, if you're interested, send us a DM, a message. We'd love to chat with you. And that's where that's kind of our front door for leaders from around the world. And usually every week of the year, there's someone, if not multiple people who kind of stumble into that front door and are like, "Hey, tell me more about this. This is cool. I'd love to learn more." And so that's been amazing. And as a social media, as a mobilizing tool, we've been able to meet people around the world. And yeah, South Africa was a great example with our local leader, Kyle. He was kind of the front runner, strong leader who was like, "Hey, like I really want this to happen." But there were another uh, 20 South Africans that over the course of a 2, 3 year stretch all reached out to us. And that was part of what led me to be like, okay, we've had like 20 people from South Africa message us. It's about time I hop on a plane myself and try to maybe put a few pieces together, introduce some people. And that's when I came through and first met you in Pretoria and in Johannesburg, and then went to Cape Town on that trip as well. And through that, that led to the birthing of some local conversations in and around the country that just culminated in October 2023 in the first ever 5 How to Life events in South Africa and in Africa at large, which was amazing to see.
Yeah, it's absolutely phenomenal. And there's so much we can unpack here. But I don't want to miss the opportunity of having you on the podcast and just picking your brain in terms of the insights that you've gained in terms of engaging with and discipling Gen Z. And so I would like to shift and get you to speak into the insights you've gained. Now, you've traveled the world, you've engaged with this generation on multiple continents. Instead of going into the negative space, I would love to hear what brings you hope as you engage with Gen Z. What hope is birthed in your heart as you go from one space to the next?
I mean, yeah, as you said, there certainly is a lot of negative, and that it can be very easy to go into the negative, like, oh, Gen Z doesn't respect authority like they used to, and this, that, and that can be a long and sometimes helpful, sometimes unhelpful conversation. But the good news is that there is a lot of good news in the next generation. I often encounter young people who really do love the Lord. Now, sometimes they're very young in their faith in terms of their ability to step out and know what leadership looks like or know what really serving the Lord can look like. And there's a lot of discipleship that needs to be done, even for the young people who do really know the Lord or have come to know the Lord, and especially in our globalized Christian orbits. But the hopeful part of this, though, is that there are young people who are like, look, Jesus has changed my life, and I want to live for him, and I want to lead for him and make a difference in my own background and context. And in the USA, the negative statistic is that only 4% of teenagers hold a biblical worldview. That's one out of every 25 American young people, according to the Barna Group, that truly know what it means to live for Christ and follow Jesus and have that just biblical understanding of the Bible and how that applies to our life in that sort of way. It means 24 out of 25 do not, 96 out of 100 do not. And if you look at it that way, that could be really concerning. I think 35% of Gen Z in the US is atheist, agnostic, or nothing in particular. That's over a third of American youth, and a lot of other pretty discouraging statistics on that list. But I will say that 4% often are really strong and bold, and they do want to do something more to make an impact. And our hope is to work with that 4% who are passionate, which if you take 4% of 20 million young people in the US, that's still a lot of young people who do know Jesus, but they're often left unchallenged, unempowered. And our hope is to find leaders like that give them opportunities and turn them loose. Globally, there are a ton of young people who have been coming to faith in a variety of different contexts. We have observed this happen through one major way this happened has been through social media in the last few years. In 2020, in 2021, when everyone was at home and sheltering in place, staying home, lockdown, can't go out, people were really, it was like on the verge of a major mental health crisis and all sorts of things. And a lot of young people took to TikTok because TikTok was such an interesting, fun app. Still is. It really very much was then. And they'll watch funny videos, watch goofy videos, watch silly things, whatever. All sorts of stuff's on TikTok. But early on, when someone first joins TikTok, it'll show you a lot of different videos from random things. And somehow a bunch of young people ended up getting on the Christian video side of TikTok. And they're like, how did I end up on this side of TikTok? They swipe away. And they're like, swipe back. Wait, let's watch this. And then through that, there are a bunch of young people around the world who came to faith, who have been deeply ministered to, and there are believers now that, as of this point in time, are a few years old in their faith, who came to Christ and say, "2020 is when I gave my life to the Lord. It's when I became a believer," and they point to specific Christian videos or TikTokers who's like, "Yeah, they ministered to me. This impacted me," and some of my friends that believe it's on a conservative end, probably tens of thousands of young people around the world who have become believers as a result of TikTok. And I believe it's probably a lot more, even by this point. It could be hundreds of thousands, maybe even millions, who knows, of young people who've been at least ministered to by social media ministry. And that's an encouraging thing. It doesn't get talked about enough in the Christian circles, but the Lord has worked in a lot of hearts and lives through that. And now we meet a lot of those people around the world, and some of them have become How to Life movement leaders in New York or in Singapore or in Africa or in Canada. And there's good news. It's not all bad news. The Lord is working through young people. There are faithful people ministering to the next generation and faithful young people who are figuring it out little by little, even if it doesn't always feel like it. And which leaves me very hopeful for the Great Commission. Now, we got a lot of work to do to, I think, help provide more direction for some of this next generation around the world. But there are pieces in place that the Lord is working through, and I believe deeply wants to move even more so through. And that does leave me overall pretty hopeful.
Yeah, I mean, as you're speaking, I just can't help but think about the people who have remained listening to this podcast episode. If they're up to this point in our interview, it means that they have some sort of interest and buy-in in terms of reaching the next generation, whether it's their own kids or grandchildren or their ministers or maybe their Gen Z leaders themselves. I mean, you mentioned how you use TikTok to reach a next generation. That didn't exist 10 years ago, and our world is rapidly changing, but God's gospel remains timeless, right? And his truth is his truth. How have you seen the gospel's timeless truth being communicated in a way that has resonated with Gen Z culture and society in general? You know, like I'm thinking about these people, they're hearing your story, they're hearing how lives are being impacted, and they're just wondering, how do I communicate to Gen Z in a way that can really lead them towards Christ and experiencing Christ in a new way, in a fresh way? Could you share a bit about that? How would you inspire? How would you encourage someone to communicate to Gen Zs? And are there any like aspects of Jesus' teaching that particularly resonate with Gen Z that you think might be helpful for people to know?
So Gen Z overall really is it's a generation very passionate about authenticity. It's a generation that has seen previous generations come before them who they feel like have not necessarily been that authentic or altruistic, and they see through the flashiness and the facade. And if they, like a lot of young people, they don't like the just modern American flashy mega church with fog machines and this and that. I mean, some do, some don't, but the a lot seep through it, and they're like, look, this is cool and all, but like I have deep issues I'm going through in my life, and could we just talk about real stuff here rather than all this fake stuff? There's literally another app called Be Real that has emerged as a result of this, which the concept of that is every once a day at a random time, it gives you a notification and you're supposed to take a picture of wherever you are, for forward camera, backwards camera, and it shows where you are. And because you only get one like 2 minute window a day, you can't just fake that. You have to be real. Oh, well, I guess it caught me and I'm a little off guard, but time to be real. And that I think really represents the heart of a generation. We even had a How to Life group that made that their theme. They're like, be real because Jesus is for real. So it was kind of interesting. And it's true. Like, I think be real represents a bit of a motto for Gen Z in a sense. And although they still have their ways of being fake as well, but like, and sometimes they're are being real in a fake way. There's all sorts of stuff like, but the timeless truth of the gospel is something that is real. It's the realest thing that there is, and that has been able to reach many young people. So I would say if you're an adult and you're like, hey, how can I mentor the next generation? I've got Gen Z in my world. How can I minister to them? How can I encourage them? How can I point them toward Christ? I would encourage you to be real yourself. Share about your story. How did you come to know Jesus? Who is Jesus to you? What does he mean to you? What is your testimony? What is your story? What is the hope that Jesus has given you? Rather than, oh, this is what it means to be a Christian and these rules and this and that. And you got to go to church. You got to do like young people want to know just who is Jesus to you? They want to know that they serve a very real, active, tangible, living, moving God. And I think we need to help make the Lord to be big. We don't need to dumb things down for young people. And there, in the last part of the 20th century in the US, there has been a lot of ministry shift and youth ministry to it's often been, oh, let's just make this a the coolest pizza party in town and that'll get more kids to come to our youth group, or let's play more funny games and let's have all this stuff. And that kind of worked for a few people, I think, at a time. And there's certainly a lot of people that ministered to, but I think we now are living in a day and age where young people are like, please cut it with all that stuff. We want to know just who is Jesus? Help me learn the basics of discipleship. Help point me and how I can read my Bible faithfully. And I think that would be my biggest encouragement to anyone is just keep the gospel at the center, the just core of Jesus and the life change that he brings, and repentance and turning from sin and turning from a life of my way and doing things my way and to a life of God's way. And that's what the hope of the gospel has been for 2,000 years. And it's still working today for young people, no matter how much technology or whatever emerges and is weird or whatnot, or the world changes, the timeless truth of the gospel remains the same. And lives are being changed, even in Gen Z. And it's amazing to see.
So you mentioned a bit about how to engage meaningfully in a discipleship kind of sense, reaching out to those that are in our spheres of influence. But there's a big difference about doing that and mobilizing Gen Zs. Now, you've gained in years, you're no longer a 16-year-old anymore, but you are engaging with 16-year-olds across the world, trying to mobilize them to reach their friends. As you reflect on your journey of like how to life, what insights or lessons have you learned about mobilizing young people for Christ that you think might be helpful and insightful for those who want to do the same?
Yeah. When it comes to mobilizing young people, I think that what needs to be done is it's you got to have opportunities to mobilize them for. For us, that means mobilizing evangelistic campaigns and mobilizing mobilization campaigns and kind of creating games and opportunities, not games in like a silly game, but like a, hey, you've got a match, a game, like something you got to practice for and get fit for to be able to do. And by creating opportunities like, hey, we're going to have a How to Life event in Nairobi, Kenya. Everyone's like, oh, that sounds awesome. And then the young people who plan that event are going to go through a lot to do that event. They've got to plan, they've got to talk to churches, they grow in their faith, they get beat down, they like stuff happens and it's not easy necessarily at all. Sometimes it's easier than others, but it often can be quite difficult to be mobilized as a young person. But what that does is through that process, young people grow in their faith and they pray more, they read their Bible more, they seek out mentorship and community, they honestly get more involved in their local church community because it helps just they need that. It just kind of puts them into shape in a kingdom way. And I think seeing that having a purpose to mobilization is important. having good quality things. Like it's one thing to say, hey, we need just to get people to sign up and do this, or that. And that's cool. But for what my heart is let's mobilize people to action. Let's give them an opportunity, a low hanging fruit opportunity that doesn't even involve needing to buy plane tickets to fly somewhere else on a missions trip, but just how can we mobilize at home to do something? A, it's a lot cheaper, it's a lot simpler, it's easier to scale, and it's going to impact a lot of local people and perhaps even put some people on the path to elements of revival that can happen in a community when you give them an opportunity. And that's a big part of my heart is mobilization in that sense. And I think a lot of young people are open. Like I said, they want to do something. And often, if they hear about a good quality opportunity that doesn't cost them a fortune to be a part of, we as kingdom mobilizer people need to be thinking, how can we create opportunities for the young people of our world in their hometowns, in their home countries, and through that, it can be huge. And it's not easy. Young people can be deeply flaky, deeply. Again, I've seen it all. I've heard it all from young people who, like every year, we probably have hundreds of young people are like, "Oh, I want to be involved with this How to Life movement," and only 20 to 30 actually end up successfully having a campaign. Everyone else is like, "Oh, I this happened or this happened," and we get all sorts of excuses, and it's like okay, that's fine. And sometimes, again, there's choice on behalf of a local person, but we often try to help people do what they said they wanted to do. Sometimes they have to be reminded of the very vision that they had on their heart 3 years ago, 3 months ago when they first got involved. But mobilization is exciting. I love it. That's my heart is mobilization more than anything. And I want to see the young people of the world mobilized for kingdom work, starting at home and then perhaps beyond.
Jordan, this has been such a rich time. I've really enjoyed unpacking some of your stories, some of your insights, and I feel like we could go on for quite a while, but we're going to have to begin to wrap up. So, as we close off, I'm sure there are going to be people who are listening to this, they're hearing your story, they're hearing about How to Life Movement, and they're beginning to get a picture of what it might look like for them. Maybe there's a vision that's birthing in their hearts. How can people connect with you or learn more about How to Life?
For sure. If you are listening to this and you're like, hey, I'd love to learn more and be involved in some way with this How to Life ministry, or just you have questions for me in terms of Gen Z, I know I and my team would love to connect with you. The easiest way is through Instagram. So if you yourself have Instagram, there's two pages. One is at How to Life Movement, and that's our main page. That's where most people reach out to us. That'd be a great place to both follow the page to keep up with what's happening. And if you send us a message on there, we'd love to reply and chat with you. And maybe you yourself are between the ages of 16 and 22, or even 23, 24, 25, and you're like, hey, I maybe want to help mobilize a How to Life campaign in my country, or maybe you know people that are that age. We would love to talk with you about that. And we are in a position where we can help a lot of people around the world right now, and would love to help you do that if that is on your heart in some way. Or also myself, I'm just at Jordan Whitmer, JordanWhitmer on Instagram. Feel free to reach out to me on there. You can also track me down in other places, whether it be Facebook or also the How to Life website, howtolifemovement.com. We've got some contact emails and things on there, and usually can get back to all that as well. So those are the best ways to reach out. I also have a podcast of my own called Gen Z Today Podcast. We have quite a few episodes on there that have been recorded over the last few years, interviewing young leaders and people really from all over the world, actually, now on there. And there's some encouraging conversations on there that I think would administer to you if you want to check it out. And again, thank you for listening. Thank you for your heart for young people. If you've made it this far, and I guess my final challenge for you, if you're listening to this, is just to know that God's not done with the next generation. Jesus is the hope for Gen Z. He's the hope for this world. Let's not give up and let's not lose hope when it comes to mobilizing the youth of today for Gen Z, and then future generations to come, Gen Alpha, and all. There's a lot more coming up, and investing in youth is a huge priority for sure.
Well, I don't think there's a better way to wrap up this podcast episode than with those final words that you've given us. I'll put all of those different spaces and places they can find you and connect with you into the show notes. And I would encourage anyone interested in Gen Z to go check out your podcast. It's really good. I've been following it for quite a while now. And so I'll also include that in the show notes. Jordan, thank you so much for your time. This has been such a blessing to me, and I know that it's a blessing to many others who have been joining us and have been listening through to this point in the episode. So thank you for your time. Thank you for the inspiring things that you're doing across the world. And I pray and trust that God will continue to bless you and use you as you seek to reach the next generation for Christ.
Thanks, Jason. Thank you so much for having me.